This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I am on location in Seattle, Washington for this episode of the podcast. And, an interesting thing happened over the past couple of weeks on our Brewery Workshop Facebook group, which is populated by folks that have attended any of our past 8 Brewery Workshop New Brewery Accelerator events. Some folks posted a collaboration picture. And it was Frank from Bickerson's and Jason from Stemma Brewing up in Bellingham and Phil Camarano from Good Society Brewing. And, so I was looking at this, started looking up all the breweries, and I was like, Good Society. And then I was looking at the GABF awards from last year, like, Good Society. Hey, Good Society won Small Brew Pub of the Year at GABF last year in a gold medal for the first to fail grisette. And so, I started putting those pieces together and I was like, we should have a conversation here. And so here we are at Good Society with Nick Berger and Phil Camarano of Good Society. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That was a long-winded story to get to that point to say hello.
Yeah.
But what a wild year. You opened 5 weeks before COVID shut down the entire world. I can't wait to talk to you about that experience of ups and downs, or really downs and then a very big up toward the end of the year, and how you all have managed through this launching a brewery in one of the worst possible years to launch a brewery, while also figuring out how to make beer and obviously figuring out how to make award-winning beer, through that entire process. We're going to talk about that. But first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with all aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project, or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt. Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt is the workhorse of many a brewery and is home in a variety of beer styles. Crisp sources the lowest nitrogen spring barley from farmers in Fife up to Moray during malting. High cast moistures and a balance of optimal germination time and temperature results in an even, well-modified malt with a rich color and balanced sweet malt flavor, which is ideally suited to ale brewing. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com for more information on Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt, or call 1-800-374-2739. So, Phil and Nick, why don't you first give me your individual beer stories and, what led you all then together to launching a brewery? Why don't you start, Phil?
So my background was with 80-year-old family beer and wine distributorship down in Tacoma. I wrapped that up, sold it in about 2000, and sort of seen the craft beer revolution from the beginnings, and was just kind of energized, thinking, gosh, it'd be great to kind of figure out how to brew beer after selling it for years and years. And a friend got me into home brewing, and became a rabid home brewer, and then got into kind of competitive home brewing and started getting a couple awards. Needed to fund the project, so I got a job at a local homebrew shop. This time I'm sort of semi-retired, looking for something to do.
Right.
And just thought at some point I do want to get into pro brewing. Took a couple of weekend courses at UC Davis and for the home brewing side, and then the possibility maybe of doing something someday. Always felt that our area in West Seattle was underserved and needed another brewery.
Right.
Because there were at the time very few options.
And that's a weird thing, because you think about Seattle as having lots of breweries, but they're not in every neighborhood where people are. And you're definitely in this neighborhood that was not served by other existing breweries.
Correct. But I just, the challenge was finding a location and feeling that to go it alone, it'd be nice to have a partner in that. So I just kind of shelved that idea until Nick came along.
So Nick, what's your story?
Enough people have asked me this by now. You think I'd have like a good elevator pitch, like an elevator speech down, but I don't. I think I actually didn't even like beer for the longest time, which is the weird thing. Like all college, didn't care for it much, even here in the Northwest. And my first job out of college, I was able to move around the country a lot, and finally when I moved back here in 2006. The beer scene was kind of blowing up around here again in Seattle, and I started tasting some beers, and I was like, hey, these are pretty good. And that's when I actually really started getting into the beer. So like my beer palate is relatively new for, compared to like some other people.
Yeah, I mean, 2006, that's not too bad.
Is it? I guess it's a long time ago now, but, I remember the beer that did it for sure. And at the time though, I was, what really got me into like brewing was
there are plenty of professional brewers now who were not legally allowed to drink in 2006.
I know. That's why I'm like, I guess it wasn't even that. I guess that was a long time ago. But I was doing some consulting work out at Microsoft, and one Christmas, I think it was the Christmas of like 2007. This guy came around and he set bottles of beer on the desk, and for everybody as kind of gifts. And I looked at him and I was like, oh, where's this from? And he's like, oh, I brewed it myself. And I was like, oh, people do that? Like, I actually didn't even know you could do that at home at that point. And my only experience with brewing beer at home was a college roommate got a beer in a bag thing where you put water in it, sealed it, and like left it in a closet for 2 weeks and then came back to it. And it was the worst thing I've ever tasted in my life.
Right.
And so I opened this guy's beer, and it was awesome. And I started asking him questions about it over the next few months or so. And then the next Christmas, my wife got me a book on how to brew, and I read it the whole day. Like that Christmas day, I just read the whole thing. And the next day I was like, hey, we got to go find some equipment. And like home brewing in 2008 wasn't the industry that it is now. Sure. Right. And so we were hunting, like we went all over the Sound, and I finally found some equipment up in Everett, and bought that and made the first batch then, and loved it, and just started thinking about different flavors and how I could get the flavors out of beer that I wanted, instead of leaving it up to somebody else. And that was kind of what intrigued me most about it. And as I grew as a home brewer, I was like, oh, someday maybe I could do this professionally. That'd be pretty fun. And
a very common thought among home brewers, for sure.
Yeah, definitely not alone in that respect. And so, but then I just thought about, man, it's really daunting. Like I started just talking to other brewers, and that was probably 2010, 11. So there was a lot of breweries popping up around here at that time, and just started talking about their journeys, and it became pretty daunting to me. So I just kind of shelved it. I was like, I'll figure it out some other time. Right. Maybe I won't, and I'll just drink all the other good beer that we have in Seattle. And then, after going between jobs here and there, I just kind of figured out that that wasn't the career I wanted anymore. And I was like, well, what career could I have? And my wife was like, hey, you gotta go see somebody, like a career coach, because I don't want you deciding you want to do this brewery thing and then 2 years later be like, not for me. And so sat with a career coach for a little bit, and didn't tell her I wanted to do anything related to a brewery. And we basically worked on like, what are you looking for in a job? And it turned out opening a brewery is actually a pretty good fit. And so by that time it was like 2016. So I started kind of stepping out of my other career, taking other jobs so I could work on a business plan, and look for that. And took me a couple of years to get the business plan, and friends and family interested in investing, that thing. And then, but I was nervous. I was like, man, I don't know how I'm going to brew the beer and do all this other stuff. And I was like, I would ideally like to find a partner, and at the very least I would hire a brewer or something like that to help out. And I was going into the homebrew shop one day to grab some ingredients for something. And there was a bunch of trophies sitting there. And I was like, oh, whose trophies are these? And they're like, oh, those are Phil's. And I'm like, get out of here. And so we started talking about it, and I asked him, hey, you ever thought about opening a brewery? And we just kind of started chatting about it, and it turns out he had, and I had, and we seemed to kind of hit it off and work well together. And so we just kind of started down that path. And I think that was early 2018. We finally found this place in August of 2018, signed a lease in November, started the build out in late June of 2019, and then opened February 14th of 2020.
Man. And so, I met Phil in 2018 in San Diego at our Newbury, our Brewery Workshop Newbury Accelerator. And so that was right at that moment where you all were finding a location and kind of, moving along this arc. Talk to me about, what, that challenge of getting from that point where you had this idea and you found a space to then actually opening a brewery, because that's an 18-month span by my terrible math.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a long time to hold on to a space, build out a space, and get a business open while, nobody's making any money.
Yep.
Yes, that is exactly it.
It was both of us not knowing exactly how to run a full-scale brewery. We had the benefit of a great architect who had built out breweries.
Who was the architect?
His name is Greg Biarco.
Yep.
So he's worked on a lot of projects around Seattle.
Cool.
Yeah. And so he was a great resource. Difficult finding a contractor to help us. And we did a lot of it ourselves, but utilized a contractor, and it actually worked out quite well for us.
Yeah.
Utilizing him. But it was just all these pieces. We didn't know exactly how they would all fit together. And then there was a huge system laying in the middle of our half-done space. And I'm like, oh my God, that's a big brew house. And, going from a 10-gallon brew house to 7 barrels was stunning. But it just kind of all fell in place initially. It was and the component of putting together a kitchen. We are a brew pub, and
right.
And
the additional challenge of building out and kitchen.
Right. And the staff, and staffing back then wasn't an issue. We had a lot of people wanted to work at a brewery back then, pre-COVID.
back then in 2019.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we probably opened later than we wanted to, and which would have been probably even more beneficial for us had we opened earlier. We would have had a little more of a track record before closing down. But I think it all just seemed to sort of work.
It did. There was definitely some frustration. I think it was just, not having done that before. And, when it's your business and your dream and you're waiting on other people, you're just like, you really feel the frustration, right? And you're like, I don't know why I'm waiting on other people. And so a good portion of that was permitting, right? So we signed a lease in November, and you let the architect go. Then you don't have your plans before you sign a lease. And so, it took probably 3 months to get the plans together. And then they were sitting with the city for another 3 to 4. So 7 of that months was nothing. It was just, it was work, and things were happening behind the scenes, but it wasn't like we were here swinging hammers and doing anything. We couldn't do anything really. And so that was a big part of it. And then, the contractor who we're not his only customer. And so understanding he's got other things to do too. And you're like, well, I don't understand, and no, you should just come and do it. And that was always the part that I was like, no, man, this isn't that big of a build out. Like, you can do this in like 2 months, and it took 5 or 6, right? And so, and it wasn't because it was a great contractor. I love the guy. And it was just, he had 3 or 4 projects working, and he had to give time to each one. And so I think not understanding that beforehand was kind of led to a little stress in the timeline. Like, had I understood that beforehand, I would have been like, oh, okay, and just plan a little bit differently. But
right. Because 18 months with no income, but a lot of money flowing out. I mean, that's a challenging kind of process. Let's, I want to, kind of delve in deeper on some of the, bigger problems that you guys had to solve through that kind of, technical build out. But first, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, or even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, Brewery DB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million brewery visits were made by craft fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In just a few weeks, Brewery DB will unveil an all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB and increase your taproom traffic, set up your account on marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So let's talk about, what would you say are the 1, 2, or 3 biggest hurdles to overcome? You mentioned timing. You mentioned contractor. What are the other major problems that you had to solve in that kind of path to getting a brewery built out?
Coordination.
Yeah.
Coordinating delivery of our brew house.
Who's the brew house from?
So the brew house is Bridgetown out of Gresham, Oregon, and great people to work with. And they were really helpful in getting us going. Lauren came the first brew day and has always been available to us ever since. Anytime there's an issue, he's responds immediately, and that was super helpful. Mm-hmm. There were some issues on timing of getting our fermenters in, which resolved itself, but it just kind of kept creating issues for us.
What brew house size did you guys settle on, and why?
7 barrels, just because we felt it was a manageable size. Once again, pre-COVID, our goal was to be a brew pub.
Yeah.
And thinking that was a manageable size. We left a little room for expansion for 15-barrel fermenters so we could, increase as we needed to. Sure. And initially, it worked great.
Yeah.
Initially? What does that mean?
Well, just in there have been times that, we wish we'd probably maybe up the fermenter sizes.
Yeah.
But overall it was a good size for us. It was a good fit for us. And, kind of thinking back to, a lot of brewers saying sort of the minimum profitability wise is 7 barrels. And so that seems to have worked for us.
Yeah. Are there other major challenges that you had to overcome along the way to opening?
Man, I think a lot of the government stuff, and it's like, I don't want to.
Well, how many months was it for your TTB registration?
The TTB was actually easy.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was like, we were almost record time for that. I think it was just a couple months, and we were shocked. We had that forever before we were even ready to use it.
Wow.
And so I think I'm not sure what happened there, but we had a good attorney, and she's like, no, this is exactly what you do, exactly what you need to submit. To sail through, and we did. Like, they didn't have any questions. There, it's like, cool. And I think it was like a couple months tops. And I think there was a thread on, it was either the Brewers Association or Pro Brewer, and like they were like, hey, post your times and all this stuff. And we were like, we post our time, and everyone's like, what? And like there was a few others that snuck through at the same that snuck through about the same time period as we did. And I'm not really sure. Again, we just had our, I think they called me once and walked through and verified some stuff, and that was it. But no, it's more like local stuff, building codes and things like that. And I remember the big one for us was the wastewater and plumbing engineering. And King County changed a lot of things the year we happened to permit. Of course, why not? To need like engineered plumbing things and just all these just all this design into your plumbing systems. And
right.
We're like, well, we just want to put some drains in, and so that one was kind of the biggest challenge. It is the least
sexy topic.
Oh, it's horrible
in the world of brewing, and yet it's actually an incredibly important one. I remember when I was up visiting Sean Lawson a couple years ago. So that was 2018. Like the brewery was cool, but he really wanted to show me the wastewater treatment, because they have a pond system where they're biodynamically treating their wastewater. And that was because that little development that they were in had built out this kind of wastewater treatment system, because in Vermont, everything has to go into streams eventually. And so it either has to be clean when it goes into streams. Having effective wastewater processing was a humongous deal. And on that same trip, I had gone to, the Alchemist. They've got a bioreactor, $1 million system treating their effluent and wastewater, to put it out again in that same kind of way. And then at the same time, I've also got other brewer friends who ran afoul because, their locality decided to change the rules on the allowed effluent that's going out of their wastewater. And they ended up having to tank and, truck out from these tanks their effluent for treatment, and all of a sudden, they had to fire people. They had to eliminate 2 or 3 positions at the brewery, just to free up the kind of money. Cause it's, $10,000 a month at least to tank this and then truck it out. And, and so it's not a very sexy issue with wastewater, but it's so incredibly important, because breweries do create a lot of that.
Yeah. And for us, it was weird because, we're small, we're tiny. It's like, we, relatively speaking, we don't know. Like, I think I calculated it out and I was like, average household sends as much as we do down the system, but it's the kind of things that we're sending down there too. It was weird because that was the year that King County just decided to start enforcing this stuff or changing the rules. Right. And you're like, dang it. And so you never really planned for that when you'd planned a year before. And all of a sudden your plumber's like, oh, well, have you gone through this? Because if you don't, and your plumbing inspector comes through, you're going to be sitting here waiting for a review of your plans for a long time. Right. So you're like, dang it. So that was one that was interesting to navigate, but we were able to get it in. They had somebody that had gone through it with another brewery, like an engineer. Right. And so our plumber was really good. And that was one thing I did was I sought out contractors. Like, I didn't let my contractor pick his contractors. I was like, I picked my contractor because he had done some beer related stuff, but then I picked the electrician and I picked the plumber because they had specifically done breweries before. Yeah. And so that was helpful because they, along with the architect being like, okay, well, I've done brewery before, having other people that had done a brewery before was incredibly helpful. And so they were the ones that were actually like, hey, you need to do this with King County before, we can try and sneak it by, and you might get by, but you probably should just be safe. And so it all worked out, but it was still one of those things you're just like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I even had to do this. So
concurrently, you also had to be thinking about what's our product? What are we going to make? What are those beers that are going to connect with people? How are we going to connect that to food that also connects with people? And what is this thing that we're going to make? Like, what is this why behind what we're doing this? Talk to me a little bit about that kind of creative development process and how you envisioned, the beers that Good Society would be known for.
Our goal was not to have specific flagship beers, partly because then we don't have to worry about repeatability. but it was more just kind of throwing things to the wall and see what stuck and find out what the neighborhood wanted. And what we found is it's a lot of families. It's a lot of people that are not particularly beer geeky.
Yeah.
And so, is what we thought would be a great beer didn't necessarily play well in the neighborhood. So it's easy then next time.
Like what? What was that beer you thought might play well that didn't play well?
Initially, it was things like the grisette, which then, once they realized it was low alcohol and won awards, it became very popular.
It's a funny thing how when you say GABF gold medal winning grisette,
changes
all of a sudden
everything.
people want to drink that.
Yeah.
But
I think a lot of people didn't know what a grisette was either.
Right.
Yeah. Like you put that up there and they're like, what?
But it gave it a little bit of a story and then sort of a sex appeal and, tell them what it was. But it was initially our goal was just kind of rotate things through. We'd always have like a pale ale and an IPA and a hazy, but it would be just changing things up. And we've sort of stuck to that a little bit. We've got a couple of like the Kolsch is basically our starter beer. An IPA that's kind of hung around for a while, and that may or may not change. But it's just, and also just trying to keep things fresh, knowing that the consumer has a short attention span and wants something new all the time. stick with hard and fast beers.
How does that work in this kind of brew pub, kind of scenario? Because, at the one time, yes, you've got beer geeks that are always into that adventure and I want to try new things. I'm going to check something else in on Untapped.
Right.
And it's going to, it's going to be new. But then, you also have, the kind of folks that just want to go have a beer and, you have a Kolsch because that's the closest thing to the, a lager or a light lager that,
right.
A non-beer fan might be interested in, although that's what we're all drinking here right now. Because it's funny how the deeper you get into beer, the more you get back into the thing, that first beer that you might have had. But in that, like, how does that square up? Are you finding that, the folks that even come in on that normal, let's just hang out and have a beer kind of approach and, still want that kind of exploration and adventure?
I'm not sure that they know that they want it.
And it's so weird because like we're talking about it, but the frame of reference that you have is the weirdest year in the history of beer in the last 40 or 50 of them, you know, or at least maybe even 70 since, World War II, potentially. Yeah. And so maybe it's not a great frame of reference to judge that from, but still.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. So what I've seen, like, hanging out in the tap room, is it though? Like, there's a lot of people that'll like latch onto a beer, right? And they'll be like, and they'll come in and the beer will be gone, and they're like, "Oh man, I really love that beer." And we're like, "Okay," and like we kind of take note of that, and like mental note, and even if it's just anecdotal and not many people do it, but then you offer them like, "Oh, well, you liked that hazy IPA, try this one." And sometimes, they're like, "Okay, I like that. No, it's fine. It's a good replacement." And so other times they're like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." And so then all of a sudden now we've introduced them to this whole, like, yeah, that beer was good, but there's the possibility that you might like this new beer better. And then, but then you still have them asking, "Hey," and you get people like, "Hey, when is this beer coming back?" And you're like, yeah, we'll bring it back sometime. Right. And so you kind of keep them intrigued and a little bit kind of, hooked in a little bit, like looking for it and following your Instagram account on when their favorite hazy IPA might be tapped again or something like that. So, like, no one's been like, "Oh man, that sucks. I can't believe you're out of that beer. Are you really never going to brew it again?" And most of them are like, "Okay." And they find something else and they enjoy that next beer and
they'll play along with your little tease.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to early 2020. So you come up with this beer program. You guys start to see a finish line, or I mean, I shouldn't call it a finish line. It really is like your starting line. Your warm ups and all of your preparation have gotten you. All of your training has gotten you here, and it's early 2020. And so you open in late January,
February 14th, Valentine's Day.
So you open February 14th, and even by February 14th, like, there's this prospect of this disease happening that like is starting to make people nervous. Talk to me about that kind of experience last year in 2020, as you start to open up a brewery, in a cold time of the year where, it's not like prime brewery season even up here in Seattle. Like I'm sure in your mind you're thinking, "Oh, we'll have a couple of months to get our feet under us before like patio season opens up and people really start coming out." And it didn't quite work out that way, did it?
There's actually an amazing amount of breweries around here that have an anniversary in January and February. Like I every year when I see the Instagram, like I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, wow, no. So that kind of gave me comfort in knowing that we were opening around the same time that others did.
Right.
We'd also had a lot of people walking by, peering in windows, opening doors, asking, "Are you ever going to open?" And because we'd had the windows papered for a long time.
Yeah.
And so there was.
Can't you guys figure out that wastewater stuff so that you can open? Come on.
I know. But there was a lot of pent up demand. Yeah. And we didn't know quite how much until opening night, and it was just the floodgates opened up.
Yeah, it was packed.
And we the COVID thing I think wasn't even on our mind. Our mind was just figuring out how we were going to serve over 800 people in one night.
So yeah, it was a lot of people.
It was a lot of people.
But one of my I did some consulting work at the Gates Foundation before I figured out that I wanted to do the brewing career. And so like I kind of had, and I was there during the Ebola outbreak I think that was like 2014. And so I was kind of in my mind, like, I'm definitely no infectious disease expert or anything, but in my mind, I was kind of thinking it was going to be more like that. Like at that point in time, it was still kind of like, okay, it's here. It's something to be mindful of. It was definitely in the news, but you're kind of thinking like, yeah, they'll get a handle on it. They'll contain it. It'll go away. So we weren't really concerned about it at all at that point in time when we were just like, we need to open up and sell some beer. That's
even
what it
before
was.
lockdown and when it was becoming more evident, it didn't stem the flow coming into the tap room.
Yeah.
They just kept coming, and no one was really masking back then. They were, hoarding toilet paper, but they kept coming and drinking beer.
That's right.
So 800 people at the opening. So we're starting out in 2020 on this crazy high.
Yep.
And there's this latent excitement in the neighborhood, and you've brought a brewery to this area, immediate neighborhood that didn't have one, but that also, because everybody here loves beer, or at least wants something new and cool to go do in their own neighborhood that they can walk to. But then March comes along, and all of a sudden the world changes.
Yes,
You've got 5 weeks under your belt when that happens.
And we were told by the governor, you'll stop serving the public on this date. And Nick came up to me that morning and said, now what do we do? And we just realized we needed to start crowler sales and delivery and to go and just, like everybody else, pivoted quickly.
That has to be, for a brewery that has a track record and knows what their sales have been and has, consistent relationships with regular customers, they can forecast around that thing.
Right.
For a brewery that's been open for 5 weeks, it's a little bit harder to do that. I'm going to ask you more about that first, but the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the highest standards in the industry. With a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing, SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, food-grade lubricants are not your top concern. Your beer is. Lucky for you, Clarion has a passion for protecting your beer by helping to make your brewing system 100% food safe. When you switch to Clarion food-grade lubricants, you're reducing the risk of costly contamination and recalls to virtually zero, all while extending the life of your equipment. And that leaves you with peace of mind to think about what really matters. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. So you guys pivot and you have to package. And so crowlers are that first move because that seems like an obvious way to move a larger volume of beer, and you can do it with pretty inexpensive equipment. How did you immediately respond to that? Did you already have a crowler machine?
We did.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. We went that.
And we thought
Dixie,
at the time,
October. Who'd you buy from?
Crowler Nation.
Crowler Nation.
Yeah,
Cool.
Crowler Nation.
Cool. We thought we had a sufficient supply of crowlers, like everybody probably did, and immediately ran out of crowlers.
Sure.
Yep.
Scrambled, found some from October, and then there was nothing. And so for a short period, we were doing growlers, which was just not part of the business plan.
Sure.
We were just going to do growlers. So we're now doing exchanges with growlers in the interim, and it all worked out. But it was, for a while there, a little touch and go.
And what happened to the business and volume and everything else in that immediate couple of months?
It was, surprisingly good. A lot of it was like everything COVID. You're trying to be generous with everybody, whether you're over tipping or, trying to support local retailers. And we were, the local brew pub, the new local brew pub, and a lot of those customers that were here for 5 weeks kept coming back. Mm-hmm. And we saw a lot of faces over and over and some new ones. And just a lot of it was just pure support for us, which was, really gratifying for us.
And it's a story that I hear kind of in a common kind of way. Like there is a fair amount of that kind of beautiful narrative to this, where consumers wanted to take care of their local breweries. And I think it speaks to that kind of relationship that breweries build in communities that, that folks kept coming, and in a lot of cases would buy in growlers what they would have bought in pints had they come otherwise. And so, that was the kind of thing that kept a lot of smaller breweries in business. As you were kind of working through that kind of pandemic challenge, how did you think about what beer you're going to continue to brew for that?
Well, we figured we had a lot of time on our hands. So, we could do a lager, which was, initially thinking with just 4 tanks, lager would be kind of tough to do, but now I had a little extra time. And saisons and just a variety of beers that we probably would have worked in the mix eventually, but the volume was down a little bit, and it was we knew after a couple of weeks into a month or so what was selling, and really started turning our attention to those beers and the seasonality of it. It was cold, it was winter, so stout did well, the brown did well. And then just kind of developing from there. But we had, as you point out, no history. We had no idea what we were doing, and it just seemed to work out quite well. And they were buying everything.
Yeah, every beer had its fans for sure.
Yeah, and everyone was COVID drinking. It was some surprisingly large orders. Every other day.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember this one guy. His beer was this British strong ale that we did, and he would come by every day for a crowler of it every day. And he was like, "Wow, dude, you drinking a lot." And this was like an 8.5% beer, and every day crowler of that thing. And then he didn't come by for a few days, and we're like, "Man, what happened to that guy?" And this was after literally 2 months of him doing this for every day. And then he came in like a week later, and we're like, "Hey, where you been, man?" And he's like, "My wife found my credit card statement." so then, so we had a lot of great support from people, and like I said, everybody, people found their different beers that they liked, and they were always happy for the variety. They were bummed because at the time we weren't doing tasters or samples or anything like that.
Yeah. And, they had to take it on faith that the beer was okay in the crowler.
Yep. So.
But if they kept coming back even through that without tasting it ahead of time, then that's some good praise. Yeah. So then we got into the fall, and things start to look like they might open up a little bit more, and obviously this is before the October, November second wave and everything else. And so you start to see some potential for some light at the end of the tunnel. Did things ramp up at that point, or was there still a caution?
For us, I'm trying to remember how we went here. So I think they let us have 25% capacity inside, like back in June of last year.
Yeah,
but hardly anybody showed up for that. And 25% is just not very many people, anyways. And then the city came out with all these temporary outdoor permits that you can have, and so we got some of those, and we started putting tables out there, and people started coming back for that. And in July was pretty good for us, and then and we kept kind of revamping our outdoor space and kind of adding some more things out there. And August really at the end of July, what did they do? They put something in place at the end of July, like you can't sit with a table outside your family members, right? So you had to be at the same household or something like that. And so that kind of ratcheted back a little bit. But then August, like everyone was outside, and September everyone's outside, and
right.
And then finally in October, they're like, "Okay, let's take away the family thing." And then a month and a half later, you're like, "Oh wow, we're in this massive wave of COVID again." And so it was kind of up and down, but we also hit the GABF awards in mid-October. So that I felt like that put us up.
That helped a lot.
Put us up on kind of like almost a plateau where like we haven't really fallen back down really from that. Even in January, when everyone's like, "Oh man, that's a bad month for breweries," right. Like we still did relatively okay. Not as great as October and November and things like that in January, but like February was up again, and we're trying to slowly climb our way back out of it again. So
For sure. Well, you just wrote the segue for me, so I don't even have to, to put it out there. But let's talk about that. So, you're entering now in this terrible year. You're entering your first Great American Beer Festival. Talk to me about, how you thought about the beers that you were going to even enter into the competition.
So I planned on entering beers in the Washington Beer Awards, which was, something I'd always wanted to do.
Sure.
I'd entered in as a pro-am brewer and won a couple awards in it and thought it would be fun to do as a pro brewer. And they canceled it because of COVID. And thinking, well, they're still doing GABF. And we had brewed a couple of beers we really liked. And one of those was the grisette. And so that was something I'd planned. I liked the Saison that came out of that. And then a Vienna lager. That was pretty much just the three beers that I put in. The ones I felt confident would do okay, having very low expectations and assuming that they'd probably cancel at the last minute, which, fortunately they didn't.
Right.
But the grisette was one that came about when I'd done a pro-am brew with another brewery. They wanted to crop up the yeast for the Saison, so they brewed a grisette. I had no idea what the style was. Did a lot of research on the style and thought, well, that makes perfectly good sense to do it again. And realized it was a fairly simple recipe, low alcohol, kind of a crushable Saison style beer. Kind of was all history after that. Fortunately, the judges loved it.
What was the research, and what did you end up landing on? For the design of this beer, Phil.
A lot of it was just cruising around online and just trying to figure out. And I can't remember the book, but there was some reference in one of the brewing books on the style. But a lot of it was just really sketchy, and then it was brewed for miners and all that.
Right.
But
MINERS.
Correct.
Yes, correct. Yes, absolutely. But it was just, it really, like any good Saison brewed back then, it was just your basic ingredients. It was 2-row wheat. And I'd always wanted to play with Hallertauer Blanc and thought, that'd probably be a pretty good vehicle for it. Love Yeast Farmhouse strain, and just had all the characteristics I wanted. And it just kind of gelled and came together and became kind of our shift beer here at the brewery. It was one that we really enjoyed drinking.
So, from your brewer mind, what was it that elevated that to, the best of its category and a gold medal?
I have absolutely no idea. Dumb luck.
Oh.
No. It was just, it was just a really easy drinking, it was just a tasty beer. We had one of our favorite beer tenders who's left us to go work in Colorado now. Richard and his wife both really love the beer, and they just love Saisons and they love funky beers and beers of interest. And I thought, gosh, there's just a lot of love from people who really like that style. That thinking that maybe it'll do well.
But what do you think made it stand out? In a crowd of other, similar, Belgian style beers in that kind of category. Was there something about your approach to the fermentation, about your approach to the hopping? What do you think that piece was?
I think it was the hop itself. I mean, as I said, I've never used Hallertau Blanc before then. And it had that nice kind of winey, grapey note to it. That, when you put that against the kind of light peppery notes of the yeast strain and between the phenolics and the esters of the yeast and the interplay with the hops, it just really worked. It was, it surprised me, that it turned out as well as it did.
Yeah. But, do you know where that Hallertau Blanc came from?
I think that was, I think it was Yakima Valley hops.
Okay.
As I recall, trying to think back.
Yeah.
We brewed it a couple times, and
Yeah.
we've had a couple different vendors.
Has the other Hallertauer Blanc hops met the same kind of punch and character that you got out of that first one?
They did.
Cool.
They did, and I think the second batch maybe was BSG. But
cool.
Yeah.
How did that award change the kind of trajectory and arc of the brewery? You know, as we often hear it, something like that, you know, especially in a city crowded with breweries like the greater metro Seattle area is, certainly not the area that you're in, but broader Seattle has plenty of breweries in it. That kind of recognition can mean something and can make people pay attention. I mean, my God, it's the reason I'm sitting here talking to you guys right now,
Yeah.
you know, and so clearly, you know, it carries that kind of meaning. You know, what did that mean for this new business just getting started in its first year, dealing with all COVID closures, to then come out and have that kind of high point moment in that first year of operation?
Yeah. I mean, it was huge. I don't think there's any really other way to state it. And I don't know if, you know, it was kind of the exposure we got because of the award.
Sure.
I don't know if that makes sense, but, you know, when we were, I think the award ceremony was a Friday night, if I remember correctly. Was it Friday night?
Probably sounds
I
right.
think it was Friday.
It was on
I think
the
it
weekend.
was. Yeah. So I think it was a Friday night. And so people heard, and we got like, there was definitely a bump in business that weekend. But then the Seattle Times picked it up and put it across the front page, or at least a headline across the front page, and then an article, you know, further in. And then like the next weekend, it was just like, wow. And, you know, for COVID times. And I was like, man, I wish we could have gotten this during non-COVID times, because it would have been like, we would have been really packed. Cause, you know, we eventually had to, you know, run wait lists and like, you know, turn people away and things like that. So, but yeah, and it's, you know, it's led to a lot of recognition, and just, which has led to fun conversations with people, even if, you know, even like this. Right. And so, you know, I don't think it could be understated what that award did. So
And we were always wondering what it would be like. In addition to COVID, we've got the double whammy of having the West Seattle Bridge go down, which is our link to the rest of the world. And there's this mentality in people in Seattle that West Seattle now is really hard to get to. And you know, in different times, you know, we probably would have driven more business. Than it did, but we were very fortunate. I think a lot of people came from Seattle and outer areas to see us after the win.
For sure.
But then your locals here in West Seattle, you know, for them now, all of a sudden they don't have to go to other places in Seattle to go drink beer.
Exactly.
And they can feel really good about themselves by going to.
Oh, they love it.
Yeah. It's such an interesting dynamic. Well, no, it's a cool thing. And of course, you know, I hadn't put those two things together until, you know, this came up in another conversation. And when I saw it, I was like, that's an impressive move. And wait, I know that guy. You know, what does the next year have in store for Good Society?
Gosh, hopefully full opening.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Getting the kitchen back on track and getting kind of back to our roots as a brew pub.
Yeah.
We did purchase a canning line. You know, that, again, not part of the original business plan, but knowing that.
What'd you buy?
We bought a Gosling from
Wild Goose.
Wild Goose. Thank you.
Just the little guy.
Yeah, which is perfect size for us. And you know, we just want to make sure we're putting out a good product if we do can. And so you'll probably focus on that a little bit more, trying to get some product out in the trade, which is, you know, just glutted with other brewers who've done the exact same thing, and just, you know, focusing on trying to come up with some semblance of a normal brew schedule and growing the business. You know,
that is that downside to this. Like you don't even have a year to forecast against. You know, next year, as you're thinking about how we plan for this, like you have the weirdest year that anyone has ever experienced last year. And this year doesn't give you a lot of actionable data around that, you know, to work from either.
Yeah, I actually was talking to Phil about that earlier today. I was just like, I'm like, we're a year and 3 months into this thing, and I can't tell you anything really. I don't know if May is supposed to be a good month or a bad month, because we were completely shut down last May selling crawlers, right? So, I mean, I have no idea. And then next year, I guess you can take some general trends, like, you know, maybe May is better or worse than April or whatever. I don't know, but like, yeah, I just don't know. And so, you know,
You're going to be rolling by the seat of your pants
Yeah.
once again.
But we're looking forward to going to CBC this year.
Yeah.
Put a couple more beers in a GABF and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to go in person to CBC this year.
We are. Yep.
I think most people are.
Yeah. We're vaccinated. We can handle it.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. Like, I cannot wait to go do CBC in person. And I know everyone's a little nervous about that, but, you know, like, yes, just get vaccinated and let's
socially distance. And
let's put all this COVID crap behind us, you
Absolutely.
know, and get on with life. No, I 100% agree. What's the big picture, you know, long-term plan for Good Society?
Well, before COVID, we really liked the neighborhood on-premise model, the brewpub type model, and so the idea was always to, you know, not to expand into some massive production brewery or anything like that. If we did that, it would literally be to service the brew pubs, not because we wanted it in every corner store in the city or or state or country or anything like that. And so, I mean, I'm hoping that's still the plan. And like, there's still, you know, for being Seattle and so many breweries, there's still neighborhoods without any brewery that you can find a nice little spot, and you might necessarily have a brew house there, but you can still open a tap room there, and people would be excited about it. And so that was kind of always the thought, and that's, I think we're still trying to make that the reality.
Bring beer to the people who need the beer.
Yep.
You know, and where they live. Oh, it's a noble goal. When will you know that you're successful? What will you count as a success down the road?
I don't know. I probably have a little bit different definition of success. Like, I see people coming back every day, and, you know, there's some people that come back 3-4 days a week and drink beer and love it. And to me, that's success. You know, obviously you got to make the dollars happen to keep that happening. But like, I think that's, you know, success to me is, you know, building a place that people want to come to, and you know, having a good partner that can make a product that people want to enjoy. So in my mind, we're already successful in a lot of ways. So
how do you define it, Phil?
I can't say what he said. So it's just, I think the success will be when, you know, I'm in another part of West Seattle and someone says, I'm going to my brewery, and it's the Good Society, you know, and they identify us as their brewery. You know, we hear that a little bit now. I just want to hear that expand a little bit to, you know, if they want to go have a beer, we're the place they're going to go have a beer, or meet friends, or.
That's a nice sentiment. You want that kind of feeling of ownership, and you want to be the neighborhood's brewery, you know, this whole West Seattle's brewery. No, it's a cool thought. Well, you're well on your way, and you've got some of the accolades, you know, to prove it. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Crisp Scottish pale malt is the workhorse of many a brewery. Old Orchard offers consistent product and reliable supply. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com today. SS Brewtech is advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality, and gain peace of mind with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on the subscribe button. If you're a pro brewer, consider our new All Access Pro subscriptions with both magazines, exclusive online content, and more. Phil and Nick, if people want to learn more about Good Society Brewery and Public House, where do they find you all?
Website, goodsocietybeer.com. And we're also on, you know, all the normal social media channels at Good Society Beer on Instagram and Facebook.
And in real life, just come right here to the tap room.
2701 California Avenue, Southwest Seattle, Washington. So we'll be here.
Well, congratulations on your success, both the ups and the downs of 2020. And may the ups continue to be bigger than the downs in this next couple of years for you all. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Cheers.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Appreciate it.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.